The start of the war between Russia and Ukraine has been an event that has shattered a lot of Russian people's psyche. It's destroyed a lot of families, some of them literally, and some of them just because people don't want to talk to each other anymore because of their disagreements on the entire thing. And it is pretty traumatic to everybody, both the people who stayed in Russia and the people who left Russia, because obviously what is currently happening in Russia is just not normal. Running a war and mobilizing people is not normal, jailing everybody and restricting freedom of speech is not normal. Obviously, a ton of Russians find themselves pretty depressed about this overall situation in the country. And you guys might think that obviously the people who are in power in Russia, they might feel differently because, well, they're the ones who are running the entire show, they're the ones who get to hammer their ideology down everybody's throats, and they're the ones who have been reaping immense economic benefits for the last 20 years or so off of this entire corruption thing. And when for the most part that is true, in some cases actually, even Russian governmental officials and politicians seem to have a pretty hard time handling everything that is going on, and a few of them have been actually going quite a little bit insane. And guys, myself as a Russian who is also an avid hater of corrupt politicians, I would like to make a little bit of fun of them. Hey there guys, it is your boy Roman, your favorite neighborhood Russian, and in today's video we are gonna be looking at a few cases of Russian politicians who have gone insane essentially because they do not fully fit in within the new Z Russian system and the new Z Russian ideology. And in particular, I would like to tell you guys little stories about three people. The infamous prosecutor of Crimea, Natalia Poklonskaya, who's turned from being a kind of a Z Orthodox Christian to essentially becoming a neo-pagan, anti-war, feminist, tradwife icon or something. I want to also mention the Russian ex-president Dmitry Medvedev, who's essentially become a raging alcoholic. And also talk a bit about Elvira Nabiulina, the head of Russia's central bank, who has essentially been constantly showing up to governmental meetings and so on in essentially mourning outfits for the entire past 2 years after the war started. And she's also having her own little moment. So let's start out with the story of Natalia Poklonskaya. Now, Natalia Poklonskaya, also known colloquially as Няш-Мяш, is somebody who you might be familiar with if you've been following Russian politics for a while. Basically, in 2013 and 2014, around the time of the revolution in Ukraine and essentially Russia's intervention into Ukraine's affairs, Natalia Poklonskaya was actually the general prosecutor of the autonomous region of Crimea within Ukraine. And you guys might already guess where this is going. Essentially, right after Russia annexed Crimea, Natalia Poklonskaya has essentially switched her allegiance from Ukraine to Russia and decided to become the prosecutor of Crimea as part of Russia. And essentially what happened is that Poklonskaya became kind of one of the main symbols of this entire Russian spring and Russian nationalism in a way. Essentially what happened is that videos with her announcing that she's going to be the prosecutor of Crimea, they went online, they went viral on YouTube and so on, and the whole entire reason why this happened is essentially because Natalia Poklonskaya had an unusual, youthful, and very feminine look compared to a lot of Russian officials that you usually see on TV, right? And basically, as far as I understand, what happened is that she essentially became an obsession for people on Japanese image boards for the simple reason of her youthful looks, once again, because we all know that, you know, you do have some people in Japan who like women who look youthful, let's just put it that way, okay? And they like drawing women that look youthful, let's just put it that way, okay? No obscenities in this video. You know what the fuck I'm talking about, okay? Nothing good. Japanese people started making drawings and arts of Natalia Poklonskaya, essentially making her look like an anime character and so on. Basically, they found her cute, right? And then that obsession carried over to 4chan and then to the Russian version of 4chan, Dvaj. And in Russia, people started calling Natalia Poklonskaya Nyasha, which comes from the Japanese word nya, which like is meant to resemble a cat meowing. So nya means like cute or whatever, and Nyasha means cutie, basically in Russian. This is essentially all like degenerate Russian 4chan culture, okay? Do not waste too much of your headspace on this one, guys. They're all kitty diddlers out there, essentially. And Natalia Poklonskaya became aware of this new popularity she got on the internet, and she actually sort of spoke out against it and said that she doesn't like it.
Здесь я прокурор, и поэтому никаких няш, мяш и тому подобное я не допущу.
So yes, she said that she doesn't like being called Nyash-Myash or whatever, and that she's a serious woman in a position of power, and what happened is that in response to that, people started making even more content on her and obsessing over her even more, and it all basically culminated in this video right here.
Власть, кровь, няш, мяш, кровь, власть, Крым наш, власть, кровь, няш, мяш.
So you guys get it, you get it. Pretty famous channel in Russia. He's made a lot of good remixes or whatever, YouTube poops. But I fucking hate this one in particular, it's Z as fuck. So yes, Natalia Poklonskaya essentially entered the Russian politics by becoming a meme and essentially in herself becoming a kind of a symbol of propaganda once again, you know, showing, hey, Russia might not care about international law and we might be killing people, but guess what? We have cute ladies, you know, this is why you should support Russia, I guess. Now even back then when this was happening, I was 16 years old and I didn't understand it, I hated it even back then, all this circle jerk around her. But long story short, right, Natalia Poklonskaya, from Ukraine's point of view, right, she's a collaborator who's essentially aided and helped Russia in annexing Crimea, okay? And Natalia Poklonskaya has been under sanctions list for ages now and so on, so she's one of the main characters essentially of Z lore. However, what's more interesting is that Natalia Poklonskaya, she's actually not had as big of a career as she could have in Russian politics because she's actually not agreeable enough and she does not fully fit in into the Z system of Russian sort of propaganda values. Now, one thing about Natalia Poklonskaya is that she's always been devoutly Christian, very open about it, she talks about it a lot. Around 2017, she ran a huge media campaign trying to ban a movie in Russia called Matilda, which was a movie about Nicholas II and essentially one of his lady friends, right? And the whole issue is that Nicholas II is actually considered a saint. He's a saint according to the Russian Orthodox Church, so she had a problem with showing an Orthodox saint in a movie in like this kind of light or whatever, as somebody who commits adultery or whatever. And even though being like super devoutly Christian fits in into Z ideology, she's always been kind of an outcast and a weirdo. People kind of never took her seriously. Everybody kind of thinks she's a little, you know, insane. And on several occasions, she's actually already shown her kind of disloyalty to the regime and the ruling party. For example, in 2018 in Russia, when a very controversial law about raising the retirement age was being planned and essentially signed, Poklonskaya was literally the only member of United Russia, the ruling party of Russia, who spoke out against this law and voted against it. She's also been even kind of toying with liberal media and talking to them and so on, being interviewed by them, oppositional, anti-Putin media, right? And in 2022, actually, right after the start of the war in Ukraine, she's even kind of spoken out against the war. Of course, she's not said anything radical, but she basically said that, you know, what is happening right now is, you know, a terrible mistake and so on. She obviously didn't go full on, you know, glory to Ukraine mode or anything, otherwise she'd be jailed immediately, but she nevertheless has spoken out and actually once again showed her sort of disloyalty to the regime, and she showed once again that in certain cases she does not want to parrot the exact same talking points and the view that, you know, the official propaganda has. Which kind of makes her a problem, right? And this is why, even though she's been a member of the State Duma and so on, she really is not as successful and, you know, close to the upper echelons of Russia as, you know, she could have been if she was just a bootlicker that would follow everything. And if she just regurgitated every propaganda viewpoint, right? And well, guys, what is happening right now is that Natalia Poklonskaya has kind of, you know, cracked, I guess. Here I am, for example, on the Instagram of Natalia Poklonskaya. And previously, you know, a lot of her posts look like this, you know, kind of her just doing governmental stuff, working. A lot of photos of her wearing suits or whatever, right? She also definitely has kind of a trad wife, you know, Slavic aesthetic to her stuff, right? But very, very recently, she's had a very sudden and strange change in her aesthetic. And now she basically dresses and looks kind of like this all the time. For example, quite recently, on October 31st, she posted this right here. A couple of pictures of... of her looking, you know, very, sort of neo-pagan kind of, whatever this aesthetic is, right? She's essentially going through a bit of a, we're currently witnessing the Shannon Blakeification of Natalia Poklonskaya, you know what I'm saying? Shannon Blake is like that ridiculous, infamous singer, influencer, whatever, who, you know, basically looks exactly like this, right? And the most interesting part about all of this is that Poklonskaya actually, she's also congratulated her followers with an ancient Celtic or Gaelic festival or celebration called Samhain, as far as I understand. That's how it's pronounced, and it's actually supposedly a festival that has Celtic neo-pagan roots and is supposed to be related to the Halloween, right? So with this exact photo and outfit, she says, during this night, you have to remember your dead relatives. You have to make them a symbolic meal. Essentially, she's talking a bit about spirituality and about, you know, making plans for the future, changing your life and ridding yourself of fears, and that, you know, this is a magical night where anything can happen or whatever. So she's essentially somehow metamorphed from being an Orthodox Christian, a very devout one. Now she's apparently on some kind of neo-pagan, you know, Celtic, but also Hyperborea, you know, kind of vibe. Or whatever. She's also recently visited a school in Kherson, and apparently was telling kids about like ancient Scandinavian runes or something like that. So once again, very interesting. And essentially what happened is that the Russian Orthodox Church actually had a problem with this, and in fact the Patriarch of Russia, Kirill, he actually mentioned Natalia Poklonskaya and spoke out that she is like a part of a movement that is trying to bring back paganism. And he says, we could mention Natalia Poklonskaya, but she's not the only problem. For example, I know that certain governmental schools in our regions of Russia have started to celebrate a very popular Western holiday, Halloween. And essentially the Russian Patriarch calls all of this a kind of a movement against Christianity in Russia that is trying to destroy Russia's traditional values or whatever. So what is going on here? That is just my biggest question. Natalia Poklonskaya has always had a reputation of being, you know, this devout Christian that's almost too devout, and seeing this is absolutely insane. For like most of Russians, even those who support her, it's immensely even more funny for Russians who already dislike her because they're not Z, right? And yeah, this is essentially kind of her drip now. She's apparently, I guess, gone insane because she doesn't fit in into the Russian regime too well, because she's not agreeable enough and not loyal enough. So now she's walking around dressed like Shanine Blake and congratulating Russians with pagan holidays. I mean, if this is not a sign that there is a mental health crisis within the ruling class of Russia, then I don't know what is. Now the second two I want to mention a little bit more briefly, because they're a bit better known, I guess, but the thing is, if you guys follow Russian politics and what Russian politicians are saying and what happens to a lot of Russian politicians, you might also know about the absolute meltdown of Dmitry Medvedev. Now, if you guys don't know who Dmitry Medvedev is, he was actually president of Russia from 2008 till 2012. He's essentially a person who's been a member of Putin's inner circle for a very long time, since the early 90s, since he's ever been in power. And Medvedev was basically president from 2008 till 2012 so that Vladimir Putin could come back again in 2012 and then become president, because back then in Russia they actually had a 2-term limit. You could not be president in Russia for more than 2 consecutive terms. They actually cancelled that law recently, by the way, after Putin came in power, which, you know, only raises questions. I wonder why, right? But essentially, Dmitry Medvedev during his time of reign has kind of become almost a symbol of a different Russia. I mean, a lot of stuff has happened during his reign that was bad, for example, the Georgia War, right? And basically, the most important decisions in Russia were still made by Vladimir Putin, who was just the prime minister instead of president at the time, right? But Dmitry Medvedev essentially kind of got a reputation of being a more open, sort of kind of pro-free speech, pro-human rights, pro-European leader. A lot of his speeches and a lot of the stuff that he said back in the day was super pro-European. Medvedev was reportedly actually talking to European leaders about removing visas for European Union for Russians. He also embraced oppositional media and so on, and overall, he was hanging out with Schwarzenegger and Steve Jobs, and he was eating burgers with Obama. He was trying to be like a kind of a pro-Western leader. And essentially, if you've been following Dmitry Medvedev now, if you know what is going on, he is absolutely insane. First of all, there's a lot of talk, a lot of rumors going around that Dmitry Medvedev feels unfulfilled for some reason, and that, you know, he really likes to partake in the bottle, that he likes to drink quite a lot, and you can see, you know, it kind of by looking at him, because when he was president, he kind of looked pretty good. He was like a young, healthy leader, but now he looks insane. He actually has a Telegram channel in which he actually posts new updates and new sort of bars, essentially. He's constantly always calling Ukraine a Nazi band-aid country. He's calling everybody in the West Nazis. He's had a post that went pretty viral in which he said that he's always knew that, like, the West always wanted to destroy Russia, and even when he was friendly with the West, he knew they were actually backstabbers that were trying to destroy us, and he hates them with a passion. He hates the West because they want to destroy us. And overall, Medvedev has kind of become a meme, because his insane transition from, once again, being this kind of pro-Western, pro-European guy to essentially becoming the most Z person out there, because he constantly always talks about, like, nuking Ukraine or whatever. Like, he's actually become one of the most deranged Z people out there. And once again, looking at it from the outside, I'm seeing this transformation of Dmitry Medvedev that happened, once again, as a result of the fact that perhaps, maybe, he thought Russia would turn out a different way, and perhaps maybe he thought that what he did during his time as president would actually be important, but I feel like he probably feels to a certain degree like his life's work, in a sense, right, or what he was doing has led to nothing, and so what he's doing is that he's coping coping with this fact by essentially turning extremely Z and saying that, we need to nuke the West. That's his way of coping with the fact that he's sort of, maybe his sort of dream of a more friendly pro-European Russia or whatever never came to fruition. Although, who knows? Maybe he's never had that dream at all, right? And it's kind of the same for Poklonskaya in my opinion also, because perhaps maybe when she switched sides, right? When she when she got auto-balanced from one team to the other in 2014 in Crimea.
Go play your pinko chess game with the devil, commie. Stars and Stripes beats Hammer and Sickle. Look it up. This American boot just kicked your ass back to Russia. Checkmate, Stalingrad.
Maybe perhaps she had a better image of Russia in her head, you know what I mean? And after she's kind of, betrayed Ukraine and, this whole time that she's been in power, this whole time, she's probably been looking at everything that Russia is doing and everything that Russia is doing to Ukraine, which is, her country of origin, after all, right? Ukraine is the country that she grew up in. She probably also doesn't feel right about her decisions and what she's done and kind of the role that she played in all of this. Which now essentially brings us to our third example, the third person that I wanted to talk about and mention, which is the head of the Central Bank of Russia, Elvira Nabiullina. Nabiullina is an economist who has been holding the position of the head of the Central Bank of Russia for actually pretty much 10 years now, since 2013, and she's kind of been working in the Russian Ministry of Economy for, quite a few decades now before even getting this position. And Nabiullina essentially is a person who kind of has a reputation of being a sort of a systemic liberal in Russia, right? Because no matter how, Z and ridiculous Russia gets, Russia still does want actually effective people sometimes in power, right? Not everybody is there to just, steal money, although most of them are. There are actually a few people in Russian politics that are considered by many to be sort of very professional and very, good at what they do, and they're kind of keeping the whole thing together, but they're actually not really super ideologically like Z or anything like that. They're not extremely outspoken about it, right? And Nabiullina is kind of one of these people. Nabiullina is basically kind of the person that is in control of the Russian economy right now, and she's actually done a lot to try to, stop Russia from falling into complete chaos, right? After all the sanctions and so on, especially recently. And the things that she's been doing are considered pretty effective and to be pretty good decisions actually, as far as keeping Russia from ridiculous inflation or whatever. However, the thing is, there is only so much that a well-educated person like Nabiullina can do to stop Russia from, crashing into a wall or, flying off the edge of a cliff, right? Which is currently happening because I don't know if you guys keep up with the Russian economy right now or not, but currently the interest rate in Russia has been raised to 21%, which is insane. It's only gotten that bad in February of 2022, right after the sanctions hit, and then it slowly went down. You see in 2020 here in COVID, it was 4.2%. Now it is at 21%, right? It's extremely over, like mortgages and stuff like that in Russia is just absolutely ridiculous. The lengths that the government is trying to go to stop the insane inflation that might come are ridiculous, right? And they're very damaging to Russia's economy actually in the long run, but they are beneficial in the short run, and it does help Russia to continue waging the war essentially, right? And yes, Nabiullina is actually a person that is not very outspoken about politics. She doesn't really talk about Nazis in Ukraine or something like that, right? That's not her prerogative. But she does talk a lot about the economy and so on, right? And one really interesting detail that actually tells us about the mood of Elvira Nabiullina is she's kind of created big interest around herself in the press by wearing certain brooches on her blouse or on her sweater when she goes into public to basically speak about the policy of the Central Bank of Russia, right? She always wears different brooches with like different characters or so on and different symbols, and they're supposed to like symbolize something. She's even said this herself, that every single brooch that she puts on, she's kind of trying to signal something to like the public about how she really feels about these reforms or whatever. And a lot of people who write about economics in Russia, they talk a lot about her brooches that she wears, and what she meant this week and so on. But what happened now in 2022 after the start of the war in Ukraine is that the very first address she's made to the public, talking about the possible measures that are going to be taken to sort of help Russia's economy after all the sanctions. This happened on February 28th of 2022. What happened is that she went out and she gave her speech wearing a full black sort of almost mourning outfit with no brooch, by the way. So she's fully dressed in black, she's looking dead inside, and I can only assume that what she's trying to convey here is that she's kind of trying to show to the people out there, she's kind of making a cry out to the public. She's saying that, yes guys, our country and our economy is pretty much dead. Like there's nothing I can do at this point. These guys in power have gone too crazy, right? She's actually repeated this on several occasions too now. For example, after Vladimir Putin's win in the recent election, what happened is that she apparently attended the inauguration of Vladimir Putin once again wearing all black in a sort of a mourning, almost like a funeral kind of attire. And she's actually spoken out publicly that she does not feel like right now is like a good time for her to wear brooches and to signal things or whatever. So essentially, she's deeply depressed. And there's a ton of videos you can see online of like, you know, certain meetings, governmental meetings in Russia where, you know, Putin's there and a bunch of ministers are there and, you know, they're all talking about the economy or whatever. And if you take a look at Nabiullina, she looks like she wants to die. Like, she's like, Jesus Christ, this is the worst thing ever. Why am I here? Why do I have to listen to this? And why do I have to deal with these people? That's kind of the vibe I get from her. And the thing is, right, I'm not saying that she's a saint in any way. She absolutely is complicit in everything that Russia is doing, right? She enables Russia to do what they're doing. She actively works for the regime and, you know, essentially helps them sort out their shit. And she's also basically sanctioned by everybody and so on, right? So she's very much considered to be a part of the regime. And she is, right? But I highly doubt, honestly, that Elvira Nabiullina is the person that gets to decide whether we invade Ukraine or not, right? She's not the one who signed off on that decision. And now she's essentially, you know, kind of stuck there and she's kind of like having to deal with these circumstances, she's having to deal with the consequences of this invasion. And once again, when the country of Russia is a train that is, you know, actively driving itself off of the edge of the cliff, right? Once again, there is only so much that an educated sort of, you know, systemic liberal like Nabiullina can do. So the way I see it is that she probably does realize to a certain degree her, you know, role in all of this, and she does realize that she's complicit in this war and so on. She does realize that she's essentially helping this war continue, but at the same time, she doesn't feel too good about it, right? So, again, I don't know what this is, if not the sign of a mental health crisis within the ruling class of Russia. As much as you might think that, you know, even the Russian ruling class is a monolith, they do still have people there who probably feel at the end of the day that they're doing something wrong and that, you know, what is happening is absolutely ridiculous. And these stories that we looked at here, these are essentially the stories of people who probably realize deep down that what they're doing is not good, but they're just too scared and they're just, you know, not ready to kind of, you know, actually make a change and actually try to do something about it, or just quit. They don't want to lose that position that they're in, right? And they're basically feeling like it is too late to quit at this point, but nevertheless, they still hate themselves and they still drink themselves to death or whatever. And the amount of these, you know, people in Russian politics who feel like they're powerless and feel like, you know, their reputation is already ruined because already they're part of the Z regime and who feel like they cannot do anything about it. These people exist and there's a lot of them. So in my opinion, personally, as a Russian who once again dislikes corrupt politicians very much, as a Russian who's left Russia, once again, quite honestly, I do have a slight little bit of empathy for these people. I do kind of understand and I kind of do see how a person can end up like this, but nevertheless, my reaction to all this is kind of cry me a river, you know what I'm saying? You're a person with immense power, immense wealth, you control the fates of millions and millions of people. I do not care if you're sad. I'm sorry because you're actively destroying the lives of millions of people. You know what I'm saying? I don't really care if they're sad and I'm not going to, you know, let them cry on my shoulder essentially, but nevertheless, in my opinion, this mental health crisis in Russian politics is absolutely fascinating. So yeah guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, I hope you enjoyed what I had to say in this. If you guys did enjoy it, please make sure to slap the like on this video. As always guys, if you would like to support me additionally, if you guys would like to support me financially, then go over to the link down in the description and become a YouTube member. It is basically like YouTube's own version of Patreon, it's the best way to support me, it's a monthly donation type of thing. Or if you'd like to do a one-time donation, then do a super thanks underneath this video. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching, my voice is gone, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.